Elon Musk saves Donald Trump from a wild animal attacking him. In the dense, untamed jungle, the air was thick with humidity, and the chirping of unseen creatures echoed in the distance. The world seemed alive with energy, as if every leaf, every rustle of the trees, held a story of survival, danger, and untold secrets. In the midst of it all, two figures moved forward cautiously, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Donald Trump, dressed in a sharp suit that somehow managed to withstand the heat, walked with determination. Beside him, Elon Musk, clad in a sleek suit designed for both comfort and practicality, kept his eyes peeled for any threats. Their mission was clear: navigate the jungle and secure the valuable technology hidden deep within the wilderness. But there was a problem. They weren't alone. Suddenly, from the underbrush, a massive, snarling creature leapt out with terrifying speed. It was a hybrid of a lion and a bear, muscular, powerful, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the thick foliage. The beast roared loudly, a sound that shook the ground beneath them. "Move, Trump!" Elon shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. But before Donald could react, the creature lunged toward him, its fangs bared, its claws outstretched, ready to tear into him. Donald's eyes widened in surprise as he froze, unable to react quickly enough. The beast was too fast, too close. In that moment, something inside Elon Musk shifted. His instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he rushed toward the creature. With one swift motion, he grabbed the tranquilizer gun from his belt and aimed it at the beast. He fired. The dart struck the creature in the side, but it didn't stop its attack. Elon's heart raced as he realized the tranquilizer hadn't taken immediate effect. The beast growled, its massive jaws snapping in Donald's direction. Elon didn't have time to hesitate. He pulled out another dart, loading it quickly. The creature's attention was now solely focused on Donald, its rage blinding it to anything else. No, not today. Elon gritted his teeth and aimed one last time, knowing this was their only shot. He fired. This time, the dart struck with precision, and within seconds, the creature's growl softened. It staggered back, its massive frame shaking, before finally collapsing to the ground in a heavy thud. The jungle was silent once more, the only sound being the labored breathing of both men. Donald Trump, still frozen in place, stared at the fallen creature. His heart raced, and his hands trembled slightly as he took in the scene. Elon stood a few feet away, the tranquilizer gun still in hand, his breathing steady as if the events that just unfolded hadn't shaken him at all. "That was too close," Donald said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He looked at Elon, who was casually inspecting the tranquilizer gun as if the whole ordeal had been just another Tuesday. Elon smiled wryly. "Yeah, it was a close call. You're lucky I was here." "I'm lucky you were here?" Donald asked, still in a state of shock. "You just saved my life, Elon. What the hell was that thing?" "Some kind of hybrid predator. They've been engineered for extreme strength and aggression," Elon explained, holstering the gun and turning his attention back to Donald. "But don't worry. This jungle is full of surprises. You just have to be ready for them." Donald let out a slow breath, looking down at the beast, now motionless on the jungle floor. "I didn't expect to get attacked in the middle of a business trip," he muttered. Elon chuckled. "Well, you should have known. Nothing's ever simple when you're around." Donald raised an eyebrow but couldn't suppress a grin. Despite the situation, the humor wasn't lost on him. He had spent enough time in the business world to know that even the most unpredictable circumstances had a way of working themselves out. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the tension slowly dissipating as they both processed what had just happened. The threat had been neutralized, and for the first time since entering the jungle, Donald allowed himself to relax, just a little. "Thanks, Elon. I don't know what I would have done without you," Donald said, turning to his companion with a more serious expression. Elon gave a small nod. "No problem. That's what friends are for. Just remember, next time we're out here, let me handle the wild animals." "You've got that right," Donald replied with a laugh, still trying to shake off the adrenaline. "I don't think I'm cut out for this kind of thing." They both turned and began to walk further into the jungle, the threat now behind them. The calm that followed was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just experienced. Elon led the way, his every step purposeful, while Donald, now more aware of the danger around him, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. As they walked, Donald couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre turn of events. Here they were, two of the world's most powerful men, surrounded by wild creatures, far from the comfort of their usual environments. And yet, it was Elon who had come through when it mattered most. His calm and quick thinking had saved the day, and for that, Donald was grateful. "You know, Elon, you've got guts. I'll give you that," Donald said, breaking the silence. "I'm just doing my part," Elon replied. "We all have a role to play, even in the wild." The two of them continued their journey through the jungle, ready for whatever else might come their way. The bond between them had been strengthened, not just by business but by the shared experience of surviving the unthinkable. And with Elon by his side, Donald felt a newfound sense of confidence, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. The jungle had been unforgiving, but together, they had triumphed. And as they made their way toward the next stage of their journey, both men knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The path through the jungle was uneven and treacherous, but Elon Musk and Donald Trump made their way forward with a sense of purpose. The adrenaline from the earlier encounter with the wild creatures still lingered, but the pair knew they had a job to finish. The mission wasn't over. They had to push through the challenges of this dangerous environment and secure the technology hidden deep within the jungle. The trees towered above them, their thick canopies filtering the sunlight into fractured rays. The air was damp and heavy, making each breath feel like an effort. But despite the conditions, the two men were determined to reach their destination. They had been tasked with retrieving a piece of advanced technology that could change the world, and neither of them was going to back down. Elon, his mind always working, was already strategizing their next steps. He was thinking about the bigger picture, the future of the technology they were retrieving, the impact it would have, and how it would fit into his ever-expanding plans. But in the back of his mind, the wild encounter from earlier kept replaying. That creature had been unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Hybrid animals, genetically engineered to be more powerful and aggressive, were not a common threat, even in a place like this. Donald shook his head with a grin. "No kidding. I'm used to boardrooms and golf courses, but this is next level." Elon laughed. "You never know what life has in store, right?" As they continued their trek through the jungle, they talked more about the mission and what it meant. The piece of technology they had secured was groundbreaking, cutting-edge advancements that had the potential to revolutionize multiple industries. Elon's mind was already racing with ideas of how it could be integrated into his various ventures, from space exploration to renewable energy solutions. But there was a deeper sense of purpose driving him, one that transcended the profit margins or technological achievements. This was about making a lasting impact, changing the world for the better, and leaving a legacy for future generations. Donald, on the other hand, was focused on the strategic implications. The technology could give him an edge in business, something that would cement his status as a titan in the corporate world. But as he walked alongside Elon, he began to realize that there was more to this journey than just the material gains. This was about pushing boundaries, taking risks, and working with people who shared a similar vision, people like Elon Musk. "You know, Elon," Donald said after a few moments of silence, "I've always been about getting the best deals. But what you're doing, it's on a whole different level. It's not just about the deal anymore, is it?" Elon smiled knowingly. "No, it's not just about the deal. It's about pushing humanity forward. About solving big problems." Donald nodded slowly, taking in Elon's words. For all his experience in business and leadership, there was something undeniably captivating about Elon's passion for innovation and progress. Donald had always been driven by a desire to win, to come out on top, but he was beginning to see the value in a different kind of success, one that was measured not just in profits, but in the impact it had on the world. "I've got to admit," Donald said, "I'm starting to see things differently. Maybe there's more to all of this than just making money." Elon's eyes glinted with a mix of pride and satisfaction. "It's about leaving the world better than you found it, Donald. That's what real success looks like." As the two men continued to talk, the jungle around them seemed to grow quieter. The distant sounds of wildlife were replaced by an eerie stillness, a sense of calm before the storm. Elon's instincts were on high alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. He had learned the hard way that danger in the jungle often came when you least expected it. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes caught their attention. Elon instinctively reached for the tranquilizer gun, his fingers brushing the handle as he prepared for the worst. But before he could act, a figure emerged from the trees, one they had not anticipated. It was a man dressed in military camouflage, his face obscured by a mask. He held a rifle in one hand, and his eyes locked onto Elon and Donald with an intensity that made them both stop in their tracks. "Who are you?" Elon asked, his voice steady but laced with caution. The man said nothing at first. Instead, he took a step forward, his grip on the rifle tightening. There was a tense silence, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Then, the man spoke, his voice cold and calculated. "I'm here to stop you." Donald and Elon exchanged a quick glance. They had encountered many dangers in their time, but this was different. This was someone who had been waiting for them. "You're not going to stop us," Elon said firmly, his hands still gripping the tranquilizer gun. "We've come too far for that." The man didn't flinch. "You think you can just walk away with that technology? You have no idea who you're dealing with?" Elon's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, his body language confident. "I'm not interested in playing games. Tell us who you work for." For a brief moment, the man hesitated. But then he lowered his rifle slightly, his eyes scanning the jungle around them. "I work for the people who want to control this world. The technology you've just acquired, it's not meant for the likes of you. It's meant for power. For those who understand how to use it." Donald's brow furrowed as he stepped forward, his voice sharp. "And who are they exactly?" The man remained silent, his gaze flickering between Donald and Elon. It was clear he wasn't going to answer that question. But his intent was clear, they weren't going to leave without a fight. Elon raised an eyebrow. "So, what's your plan? You think you can stop us?" The man tightened his grip on the rifle, but before he could make a move, there was a loud roar from the jungle. The ground shook as something massive emerged from the trees. It wasn't another hybrid creature, but something even more unexpected. A group of heavily armed mercenaries, all wearing the same camouflaged gear as the first man. Elon and Donald exchanged a look of understanding. They had underestimated the scale of the operation. This was no random encounter, it was a coordinated attack. Without missing a beat, Elon stepped in front of Donald, his hand going to the tranquilizer gun at his side. "I don't think you're going to get away with this." The mercenaries didn't flinch. They had been prepared for everything, except for Elon Musk and Donald Trump working together. As the two sides stood facing each other, the tension was palpable. The jungle around them felt smaller, the air thicker. It was no longer just about the technology, it was about survival. The mercenaries began to move, closing in on their position. Elon's eyes darted to the nearest exit, calculating the best route for escape. Donald, still standing tall beside him, looked ready for whatever came next. "This is it," Donald said, his voice steady as he sized up the situation. "We either take them down, or we don't walk out of here." Elon nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. They had been through too much to back down now. Together, they would make it out of the jungle alive, and take the technology with them, whatever it took. The jungle had become a battlefield. The mercenaries advanced cautiously, their eyes locked on Elon and Donald, both of whom were ready for whatever came next. The tranquilizer gun in Elon's hand was now aimed directly at the group, his fingers poised, ready to fire. Donald, on the other hand, had already taken a few steps back, eyes scanning the terrain for anything that could give them an advantage. Elon quickly assessed the situation. The mercenaries outnumbered them, but they weren't as experienced in jungle warfare. He and Donald had the advantage of the environment. If they could stay one step ahead, they might just make it out alive. But time was running out. They needed to act fast. "We're not going to let you take the tech," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with determination. The lead mercenary smirked. "You're in over your heads. You think you can stop us?" The sound of gunfire echoed through the jungle as one of the mercenaries took a shot at Elon. The bullet whizzed past him, grazing his shoulder. He winced but didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time he'd been in danger, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. "Elon, watch out!" Donald shouted as another mercenary moved in from the side, trying to flank them. Elon quickly turned, firing the tranquilizer dart at the attacker. The dart hit its target, and the mercenary collapsed to the ground within seconds. The sound of his fall was drowned out by the deafening roar of a nearby animal. But Elon had no time to consider where the sound was coming from. They needed to get out, and they needed to get out now. "This is your last warning," Elon shouted at the remaining mercenaries. "Leave, or we won't hesitate to take you down." The leader of the mercenaries sneered. "You think we're afraid of a few darts? You're weak. You won't stop us." But just as the mercenaries were preparing to advance, the ground beneath their feet suddenly shook. A deafening roar filled the air, and before anyone could react, a massive creature emerged from the jungle. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, half lion, half bear, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. The creature lunged at the mercenaries, its jaws snapping shut with a terrifying force. Elon and Donald didn't need to say anything. They both knew what had just happened. The jungle had sent its protector, an animal engineered for this very purpose. A creature meant to protect the valuable technology hidden in the heart of the jungle. The mercenaries scrambled to defend themselves, but it was clear they were no match for the creature. The hybrid beast tore through them with terrifying precision, its claws slashing through armor and flesh alike. One by one, the mercenaries were taken down, their screams filling the air as they were torn apart. Elon and Donald stood in stunned silence, watching as the creature effortlessly wiped out the mercenaries. They had expected a fight, but they hadn't anticipated this. The jungle's defenses were more lethal than they could have imagined. "We've got to get out of here," Elon said, his voice urgent as he turned to Donald. "No." Donald nodded, his face pale from the shock of what they had just witnessed. They couldn't afford to stay and watch the destruction any longer. The creature wasn't their only concern. They still had to make it to the extraction point. The two men sprinted through the jungle, dodging branches and leaping over obstacles as they made their way to safety. The roar of the creature's rampage faded into the distance, but they knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. They couldn't outrun it forever, and they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. As they neared the clearing where the extraction point was located, they saw the helicopter waiting for them. The pilot was already in the cockpit, ready for takeoff. "We're almost there," Donald said, his voice full of relief as he picked up the pace. Elon's eyes were locked on the extraction point, but his mind was still racing. They had just faced a highly trained group of mercenaries and a genetically engineered predator, and they had survived. But they couldn't let their guard down just yet. The sound of heavy footsteps behind them made both men stop in their tracks. They turned around, expecting to see the mercenaries in hot pursuit, but what they saw was even more terrifying. The hybrid creature was charging toward them, its massive form emerging from the jungle. It wasn't alone. Several other creatures, just like it, were close behind. The jungle had unleashed its full force, and the two men were caught in the middle of it. "Get to the helicopter, now," Elon shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Donald didn't hesitate. He sprinted ahead, his focus solely on the helicopter. Elon followed closely behind, but as he glanced over his shoulder, he realized they weren't going to make it in time. The creatures were closing in fast, their eyes locked on their prey. Elon quickly made a decision. He turned, running toward the creatures. Donald's heart raced as he watched Elon make the bold move. No," he shouted, but it was too late. Elon was already engaged with the beasts. The hybrid creature lunged at him, but Elon was ready. He fired another tranquilizer dart, hitting the creature square in the chest. It stumbled back, its movements slowing as the drug took effect. But that wasn't enough. The rest of the creatures were still charging toward them. Donald turned back, his heart pounding. He couldn't leave Elon behind, not like this. He ran toward him, pushing himself harder than ever before. The helicopter was just a few yards away, but it might as well have been miles. Time was running out. With a final, desperate burst of speed, Donald reached Elon. Without a word, he grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the helicopter. The sound of the creature's growls echoed in the jungle as they closed the gap. But just as the two men reached the helicopter, the rotor blades began to spin. "Go!" the pilot shouted, his hand on the controls. Elon and Donald jumped into the helicopter, and the doors slammed shut behind them. The pilot wasted no time, lifting off into the air as the creatures leaped at them from the jungle floor below. The helicopter ascended quickly, the beasts snapping at the air as the men made their escape. As they soared into the sky, Elon and Donald both looked back, their eyes scanning the jungle below. The creatures were still there, but they were fading into the distance. The mission was over. They had survived. "We made it," Elon said, his voice steady despite the chaos they had just left behind. Donald exhaled a deep breath, his body relaxing as the tension of the past few hours lifted. "Yeah, we did." The two men sat back in their seats, taking a moment to let the gravity of the situation sink in. They had accomplished what they set out to do, and more. But the jungle had shown them just how far they were willing to go to protect their mission. As the helicopter flew off into the distance, Elon and Donald knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The world they had just entered was one of boundless opportunity and infinite danger. But with each other's support, they were ready to face whatever came next. The helicopter soared higher into the sky, leaving the chaos of the jungle behind. The whirring of the rotor blades filled the air, but it did little to drown out the silence that hung heavy between Elon and Donald. Both men sat in the back of the chopper, their minds racing. The adrenaline from the chase was slowly fading, but the reality of what they had just survived was still sinking in. Donald was the first to speak. "I've been in some tough situations before, but that was something else." Elon nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, it was. I've faced dangerous situations, but nothing like that. I thought we were done for a few times there." Donald chuckled dryly. "I wasn't sure what was going to happen either. Those things were fast." Elon leaned back in his seat, letting out a slow breath. The creatures, the mercenaries, the technology, they were all part of a bigger picture, one that neither of them fully understood. But one thing was clear: the stakes were higher than they had imagined. "We have to take the technology back. It's not just about us anymore," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We've seen the power it holds, and we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Donald gave him a sidelong glance. "I agree. But we need to figure out who's really behind all this. The mercenaries didn't just come out of nowhere. They were after something." Elon's eyes narrowed. "I think we're only scratching the surface of this. Whoever is pulling the strings has far more resources than we realized." The helicopter continued its ascent, cutting through the thick cloud cover as they headed toward their destination. The buzzing of the rotor blades was deafening, but the silence in the cabin felt more ominous. Elon's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the mystery that had unfolded before him. This wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. It was something much bigger, with far-reaching consequences. Donald turned to Elon, his expression serious. "So what now?" Elon sighed, his mind already working through the next steps. "We need to lay low for a while. Let the dust settle. The last thing we want is to draw more attention to ourselves. But once things calm down, we take the technology back to a secure location. We'll need to move quickly." Donald nodded. "Agreed. But we can't forget about the people behind all this. Whoever they are, they'll come after us again. We need to be prepared." Elon looked at Donald, his expression hardening. "We will be. I won't let them win." The helicopter continued its journey, cutting through the skies as the two men began to prepare for what would come next. Their minds were focused, their plans already forming. They knew the dangers that lay ahead, but they also knew that they had what it took to survive. Together, they could take on anything. After what felt like an eternity in the air, the helicopter finally touched down on a secure landing pad. The sound of the rotor blades slowly wound down as the helicopter came to a halt. Elon and Donald wasted no time in exiting the chopper, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The landing site was secluded, far from prying eyes. It was the perfect location for them to regroup and strategize. As they made their way toward a nearby building, their minds were already focused on the next step. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with walls covered in maps and monitors displaying various pieces of information. It was a secure facility, one that Elon had designed himself for moments like this, when the stakes were too high and every decision had to be calculated. "All right," Elon said as he sat down at one of the consoles. "We need to analyze everything we've gathered. I want to know who's behind this and I want to know why." Donald nodded, stepping toward the large table where several files were laid out. "We've got to figure out how they knew about the technology, Elon. They were waiting for us." Elon's fingers flew across the keyboard as he began to pull up data from the mission. He reviewed the encrypted files, scanning through each piece of information. As he did, his eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. "Here it is," Elon said, his voice low. "These mercenaries, they're not just anyone. This group has been involved in high-profile operations for years. But there's something even more alarming. They've been tracking our movements for months." Donald frowned. "How is that possible?" "We've been careful." Elon ran his fingers through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. "It doesn't matter how careful we are. Whoever is pulling the strings has eyes everywhere. They're watching us right now." A heavy silence filled the room as the weight of Elon's words settled in. They had thought they were in control, that they could handle whatever came their way. But now, it was clear that they were up against something far bigger than they had ever imagined. "We can't stay here for long," Donald said, his voice sharp. "We need to move. If they're tracking us, we need to throw them off the scent." Elon nodded. "You're right. We'll go off the grid for a while. We need to figure out who's behind this, but we can't do that if we're constantly looking over our shoulders." The two men spent the next few hours planning their next steps. They gathered what supplies they could, making sure to cover their tracks and leave as little evidence behind as possible. The technology was safely secured, but there was still much work to be done. As the evening settled in, the two men stood outside the building, looking out over the horizon. The world had changed in the span of a few days. They had gone from businessmen to fugitives, with the weight of the world on their shoulders. But they weren't backing down. They had a mission and they would see it through. "We'll make them regret this," Elon said quietly, his eyes steely with determination. Donald gave him a knowing look. "I believe you, Elon. Let's get to work." The night air was cool and crisp, and as the two men moved through the hidden compound, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They had done everything they could to cover their tracks, but the feeling of paranoia was hard to ignore. The building behind them, once a secure base of operations, now felt like a trap. They had used it for years, but tonight it felt like a target painted on their backs. Elon could sense Donald's unease as they made their way to a waiting vehicle parked just outside the compound. Elon turned to Donald, his voice low. "We need to go dark for a while." Donald nodded, eyes scanning the surroundings. "I agree. But what about the tech? The only thing we've got left is the package, and it's not even fully secured." Elon's mind raced as he considered the implications. The technology they had just retrieved was worth millions, maybe billions, but it was far from safe. The people hunting them were dangerous, well-funded, and connected. If they didn't stay ahead of their pursuers, their entire operation could be compromised. "We'll take it to the backup location," Elon said, walking toward the vehicle. "We've got a secure drop site. It's a long shot, but it's our best option right now." As they climbed into the vehicle, Elon quickly punched in coordinates into the navigation system. The route was far from simple. It would take them through hidden roads and remote areas, but it was their only chance of staying ahead of the mercenaries. The last thing they needed was a trail leading back to their base. "How far is the drop site?" Donald asked, glancing at the screen. Elon didn't answer right away, his mind still processing the risks. "A few hours. But we'll need to lay low along the way." The vehicle rumbled to life, and they drove off into the night, leaving the compound behind. Elon kept his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, watching for any signs of pursuit. The last thing they needed was an ambush. The next few hours were tense. They navigated through narrow, winding roads, the sound of tires on gravel the only noise breaking the eerie silence. Elon kept checking his watch, counting the minutes, while Donald kept a lookout. Eventually, they reached a secluded area, a dense forest that provided natural cover. It was an unlikely location, but it was the perfect place for a temporary hideout. They pulled off the main road, and Elon parked the vehicle behind a thick cluster of trees. "We should rest for a while. Stay off the radar," Elon suggested, looking over at Donald. Donald hesitated, glancing around the darkened landscape. "You don't think we're safe here, do you?" His voice carried a note of uncertainty. "We've been out here for hours, and I can't shake the feeling that someone's following us." Elon knew exactly what he meant. The feeling of being hunted had settled in their bones. But they didn't have any other choice. Staying on the move was their only option. "We don't have a choice," Elon replied, stepping out of the vehicle. "We need to keep the tech safe, and the only way to do that is to stay hidden for now." The two men moved quietly through the trees, setting up a temporary camp in the dense underbrush. They would wait here until dawn, then continue their journey to the backup site. Elon worked quickly, setting up a small fire to keep warm, though he remained vigilant. They couldn't afford to be complacent. Donald sat near the fire, his eyes fixed on the shadows of the forest. He knew they were in enemy territory now, and any mistake could cost them everything. "How much longer do you think we have?" he asked, his voice low. Elon paused for a moment, his mind calculating the risks. "Not long. But we need to make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." The hours dragged on in silence. Both men were exhausted, but neither of them dared to close their eyes for long. They both knew the dangers that lay ahead, and they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, Elon stood up, his eyes scanning the area. "We've got to move." "No." Donald nodded in agreement. They gathered their supplies quickly, double-checking the tech one last time. They couldn't risk anything going wrong now. The backup site was close, but the road ahead was still treacherous. The two men climbed back into the vehicle, and Elon started the engine. The forest slowly began to give way to open fields as they made their way down the narrow path. But as they approached the outskirts of the area, a distant sound caught their attention, an engine revving in the distance. Elon's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "We've got company." Donald turned to look out the rearview mirror, spotting the faint outline of a vehicle behind them. It was moving fast, closing the distance quickly. "It's them, isn't it?" Donald said, his voice tense. "They found us." Elon didn't answer. Instead, he floored the accelerator, pushing the vehicle to its limits as he tried to outrun their pursuers. The sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder, and within moments, they could see the headlights in the distance, shining brightly through the early morning mist. "We need to get to the backup site now," Elon shouted, his eyes scanning the road ahead for any escape routes. Donald glanced at the map, his heart racing. "It's just up ahead, on the left." Elon took a sharp turn, the tires screeching as they veered off the main road. The vehicle bounced over rough terrain, but Elon kept his focus. They were close now. The pursuing vehicle followed, relentless. Elon could hear the engine behind them, closing in with every passing second. He slammed his foot down on the pedal, pushing the car faster. "Hold on," Elon shouted as the ground beneath them became more uneven. Donald gripped the seat tightly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The enemy vehicle was still there, not giving up. They were closing in. In a last-ditch effort, Elon took another sharp turn, heading toward a series of hills. He knew the terrain well, and he hoped it would give them the cover they needed. As the vehicle sped through the rough terrain, the sound of the pursuing vehicle grew distant. They had lost them for now. Elon allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but he knew it wasn't over. They still had a long way to go, and danger was never far behind. "We're almost there," Elon said quietly, his grip tightening on the wheel. "We'll be safe soon." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't out of danger yet. The battle was far from over. The real fight was just beginning.